Hey everyone, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are tackling our exact lesson target: organized main events, oral tradition, text collection. By the time we wrap up, you're going to have a rock-solid grasp on how to break down the structure of literally any narrative you encounter, and you'll truly understand the fluid, changing nature of oral tradition. Here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with 1, understanding oral tradition. Move right into 2, mapping the narrative sequence. Do some 3, practice using a story called The Lantern on Cedar Hill. Hit a couple of 4, pause checks, and finish up with 5, task your text collection.
All right, Section 1, Understanding Oral Tradition. Let's take a look at how folk literature was actually preserved long before written language took over.
So think about folk stories, legends, and fairy tales. These all started out entirely as spoken works. And because they were shared out loud across generations before writing was a common thing, storytellers had to use repeated patterns to keep things straight. Things like a character going on 3 distinct journeys, or maybe a catchy rhythmic phrase that pops up over and over. These patterns were absolutely crucial memory aids. They literally helped storytellers remember the core elements of a tale so they could safely pass it down to the next generation. Now, notice the stark contrast here on screen, because this is where a lot of people get tripped up. The big misconception is that oral folktales exist as this rigid, perfectly unchanged script, like a locked-in movie screenplay. But the reality? Oral tradition is a living, breathing thing. It inherently features variation across different tellings. Depending on the region, or even just the specific storyteller, the details naturally shift around, even while the core lesson stays exactly the same.
Moving right along to Section 2, Mapping the Narrative Sequence. Building on that foundation, let's figure out how we actually structure the plots of these super dynamic stories.
If we really want to understand how a story is built, we have to move past just giving a basic summary. A summary just gives you the broad 30,000-foot view of the central idea. But to truly analyze the structure, you need to do a strict, event-by-event retelling. That means tracking the exact plot points in order so you can see precisely how the narrative sequence unfolds and how characters respond to specific challenges as they pop up. And here's the crucial thing to remember. A minor detail is not automatically a main event. When we're organizing a narrative, things like a character's shirt color or what they ate for breakfast, well, that's usually just a minor detail, unless it's a poisoned apple, of course. A main event, on the other hand, is a significant action that directly forces the next thing to happen in the sequence. It's a major plot point that actively changes the course of the whole story.
So we can organize these main events using this really clean 4-step sequence chart. First, you start with the beginning, which just sets up the situation. Then comes the turning point, that absolutely crucial action or decision that completely pivots the story. And of course, that leads directly to the consequence, which is the immediate fallout of that pivot. Finally, we land at the ending, tracing that entire cause and effect timeline all the way to its ultimate resolution.
Let's see this in action. Section 3. Practice The Lantern on Cedar Hill. We're going to apply this structure using a specifically created practice folktale designed just to model this concept. Look at how cleanly we can map out this created practice folktale. It's like dominoes. Every observable event directly forces the next one. Step 1, the village ignores a dim signal. And because of that, Step 2 happens. A child goes to check the hill. That single action directly causes Step 3. The neighbors come together to repair the lantern. And ultimately, that results in Step 4. The repaired light safely guides the travelers home. Now, this brilliantly illustrates how we have to separate an observable event from our own interpretation of it. The literal event is simply that the child checks the hill. That's just what happened. But our interpretation, the big why it matters, is that this action serves as the turning point because it sparks community change. The plot literally pivots from neglect to action in that exact moment.
All right, Section 4, Pause Checks. Now it's time to actively test what we've just covered with 2 quick questions. Let's think back to our earlier comparison about what actually drives a plot forward. Here's your question. In a sequence chart, if a character decides to lie to a king, is that a minor detail or a main event? Take a second to think about whether or not that lie forces a new action.
Did you guess main event? Because it absolutely is. It's a main event because telling a lie directly changes how the characters are going to respond, and it alters the entire narrative sequence. It's a deliberate choice that forces a major consequence the plot now has to deal with.
Let's move on to our second question. Recall our definition of how spoken stories actually survive over time. If an oral folktale is told differently in two separate regions, does this mean one version is basically an incorrect script?
The answer is no. The reasoning here is that variation is a completely natural, expected feature of oral tradition. Because these stories adapt to their specific audience and environment over time, variations are really just different branches of the exact same storytelling tree. They are definitely not errors in a script.
Okay, Section 5. Task, your text collection. Let's see how we can transfer these skills directly into your own independent reading. So today, we learned that organizing a narrative requires selecting main events that drive consequences rather than getting bogged down in minor details. We mapped out how a story pivots around a central turning point that changes everything that follows, and we also discovered that oral tradition naturally thrives on variation rather than rigid scripts. Now it's time for your transfer task. Open your authorized text collection to list 4 main events, mark the turning point, and explain one variation that could logically occur in an oral retelling.
As we wrap up our look at organized main events, oral tradition, text collection, I want to leave you with this thought. How might identifying that single, crucial turning point completely transform your understanding of cause and effect in the very next story you read?